Hey, these are notes for how to multiply fractions, but before we or do operations of fractions, multiplication, division, addition, subtraction, before we can do that, we should talk about some common words that and tools that we're going to use to do this. So one thing is factors, numbers that we multiply together to get a number. You might have heard the phrase factors before, like what are the factors of the Packers winning the football game, or what are the factors in this issue. It might be a political issue or a social issue. What are the things that go into it? So another way of thinking about factors in math, it's numbers that multiply or go into with multiplication some bigger number. So the factors of 18, 1 goes into 18, 2 goes into 18, 3 goes into 18, 4 doesn't evenly go into 18, nor does 5. But I know 3 did, and 3 times 6 is 18. And then 2 times 9 is 18, and 1 times 18 is 18. Those are called factors. They're the smaller numbers that go into or multiply into some number, in this case 18. Whereas multiples are the product after multiplying a number by a integer or natural number, a positive number. So the multiples of 18 are, well, 18 times 1 is 18. 18 times 2 is 36. 18 times 3 is 54. 18 times, I think I lost track. 18 times 4 is 72. 18 times 5 is 90. So you're really just adding 18 each time to get the next multiple. Multiples get bigger from the number, like 18. Factors are 18 and smaller, but they have to evenly go into 18. Why do we use that? Let me get there in a second. We're going to use those common multiples to find the smallest common multiple. That's the smallest number two different numbers multiply into. Example, what is the least common multiple of 3 and 4? So I'm going to list the multiples of 3. And by the way, folks, if you did the warm-up, we talked about a common denominator. That's why we're learning how to do common multiples, because if you know how to get a common denominator, you're really thinking about the least common multiples. Multiples of 4 are 4, 8, just adding 4 every time, 12, 16. So is there a number that's in common on both lists, and what's the smallest one? Because honestly, if you keep going out and adding 3 each time to this list and 4 each time to this list, there's going to be lots of numbers that actually appear on both lists. But 12 is the smallest one that appears on both. So the least common multiple of 3 and 4 is 12. Oops, I guess I had some notes or some space in your notes for that. We'll come back to that least common multiple in a little bit, but let's start with the easiest operation to do with fractions, and that's multiplying. There's 3 steps. To multiply fractions, you multiply across the top. That's the numerators. So that's 10. 10. Top is numerators. We probably should have that written down. Then we multiply across the bottom. That's the denominators. 3 times 3 is 9. And then simplify if possible. By the way, folks, this is a mixed number. It could be a mixed number because it's an improper fraction, meaning the top number is smaller than the. Let me rephrase that. The top number is bigger than the bottom number. Keep your fractions improper. It's okay to have a bigger number on top or in the numerator than in the denominator on the bottom. That is equivalent to, and I know in middle school they had you write it as a mixed number. It's good that you know how to convert things to mixed numbers and back to improper fractions, but we're going to keep it as an improper fraction, so the one I circled. Dividing fractions. If you have to do the keep, switch, flip, or keep, change, flip, or whatever, that works here. You keep the first fraction as it is. So I'm going to actually rewrite the fraction. Yes, you need to rewrite the fraction. So that's 2/3. Switch the division sign to multiplication. That cruddy looking symbol is a division sign. So I switch that to multiplication. And then flip the second fraction, which means take the reciprocal. So these two numbers switch spots. So it's 4/5 now. There we are. Now it looks just like our first example. What are we doing to these two fractions now? We're multiplying. So we use the rules from the top example or last example. You multiply across the top, you get 8. Multiply across the bottom, you get 15. Boom. That is the right answer. Now, to add or subtract fractions, you need to get a common denominator. And that's what when you ask yourself what's the smallest number both denominators multiply into. In other words, what's the least common multiple? So let's try to find the least common multiple of 6 and 4. I'm going to skip over to this example first where we add. So the multiples of 6 are 6, 12, 18, 24. Multiples of 4, 4, 8, 12, 16, 20, 24. Oh, hey, 12 was mentioned already on both lists. In fact, I could have stopped as soon as I got to there and saw the least common multiple. Notice 24 shows up on both, but it's easier to take the smallest number. So there is a trick to finding a common denominator or a common multiple. You can always take the denominators and multiply them together. That will give you what could be on the bottom. I like to take a little more time and find the smallest number because it makes the rest of the math easy. So multiply the first denominator by the number to produce the common denominator. So what do I take 6 and times it with to get 12? 2. Multiply the first numerator, or top number, by the same thing. Because there's a rule with a fraction that what you do to the top, you have to do to the bottom. Or vice versa. What you do to the bottom, you have to do to the top. Multiply the second denominator by a number to produce the common denominator. My common denominator is 12. So what do I multiply 4 by to get 12? I have to multiply it by 3. And what you do to the bottom, you have to do to the top. It is purely a coincidence that this is 2 times 2 up here and 3 times 3. The reason that I multiplied the bottom by 3 was because 4 times 3 is 12. And the reason I multiplied the bottom over here by 2 is because 2 times 6 is 12. Alright, so then this top left multiplication, 2 times 2 is 4. On the bottom, 2 times 6 is 12. On the top right, 3 times 3 is 9. 4 times 3 is 12. Awesome. I was supposed to add fractions and I've created a common denominator. Sometimes you'll be given a common denominator, in which case you don't need to do anything besides start adding the fractions together. So I add across the top and I get 13. Remember, when you have a common denominator, do not actually add them together, just bring it across. It's like taking a half of a pizza plus a half of a pizza. You get 2 over 2. Alright, let's try subtracting. Alright, so we got to find a common denominator. What number does 4 and 5 go into? Again, you could multiply them together to find a common denominator. It's not necessarily the smallest, so that's why I'm listing out the 4s. Now I'll list out the 5s. Oh, it's 20. 20 is the least common multiple. So I multiply the first denominator by a number to produce the common denominator, which in this case is 20. So I have to multiply this by 5. And then multiply the first numerator, or top number, by the same thing. I multiply the bottom by 5, so I have to multiply the top by 5. Over here, multiply the second denominator by the same, multiply the second denominator by a number to produce the common denominator. So 5 times what is 20? That's 4. And what you do to the bottom, you have to do to the top. So now my two equivalent equations are 10 over 20 minus 12 over 20. And so we get negative 2 over 20. Now that we can reduce because 2 goes into negative 2 and 2 goes into 20. So you get negative 1 over 10. Boom. I think that's it for the notes. And the next link has some of the practice on the homework that you'll get done. Ooh, wasn't that beautiful notes? Thanks for doing that.